On today's, on the other hand, we talk with two people working to help us come together and make our nation better. Here's a sneak preview.
We need to find a way to turn the politics of fear and contempt into the politics of hope. What I worry most about are the people in the middle. We call them the exhausted majority.
This is On the Other Hand. A podcast that features community leaders in Arkansas and across the nation sharing their views and experiences on how to make our relationships and communities better. Hello and welcome to On the Other Hand. I'm your host, Glen White. I'm here with my co-host, April Chatham Carpenter. On our podcast, April and I interview community leaders in Arkansas and around the nation who help work towards solutions across various political or other divides, or who in other ways try to make things better for the community. We also interview subject matter experts and others who can contribute to reducing divisiveness in our world. I think that describes our two guests today. April, would you tell us who we have?
Well, I'm excited, Glenn. Sometimes we get the opportunity to actually talk with people that are across the nation. And this time we have two guests who actually have just written a new book that will be coming out pretty quickly, and they're going to be telling us about that. And our first guest is Dr. Doug Teschner. Doug, I've known for a long time. He and I were reminiscing a little bit about how early on in our time at Braver Angels, we actually were in a Zoom room together to get to know each other. He's currently the Braver Angels regional lead for New England, and he is going to be one of our guests today. And then we have Dr. Beth Malow, who is professor of neurology and pediatrics at Vanderbilt University. Although I think, Beth, you've moved recently up to the Northeast, close to where Doug is. So we'll hear more about that in a little bit. Doug and Beth are both active in Braver Angels. The book that's coming out that we're going to hear about today is called Beyond the Politics of Contempt: Practical Steps to Build Positive Relationships in Divided Times. So welcome to On the Other Hand, Doug and Beth.
Delighted to be here.
Well, I'm going to start with a brief introduction of you, Doug, and then Glenn's going to do an introduction of Beth as well, and you all can tell us if we've missed anything on our intros. Doug, you received your EDD from the University of Massachusetts. Your area is in administrative leadership. I know you have a blog and a newsletter that sometimes you do because I'm subscribed to that. About leadership and good communication skills in that. Doug also is a former Republican state legislator from New Hampshire. He also has served as a Peace Corps country director in Ukraine and Africa. And I know, Doug, you have posted pictures a lot of Ukraine as the war has been ongoing there. Doug is a lifelong hiker, skier, mountaineer, and he also has 6 years experience in outdoor education. One of his greatest passions is in developing leaders and building effective teams with high levels of transparency and quality communication. How I know Doug is his current work with Braver Angels as the New England regional lead. I used to be a regional lead as well. And he actually helped create a Braver Angels inspired caucus in the New Hampshire House of Representatives, which is really very forward looking in terms of braver politics and how we can talk across the divides in our countries in terms of the legislature element of our government. So, Doug, is there anything else that I missed that you'd like to add to that bio?
No, I think that's a great bio. And, I have a little business, Growing Leadership LLC, but, over time I've been so concerned about our country that I've been spending less time on that and more time with Braver Angels and issues around this book. It's really been mostly all consuming. But of course I am bringing my leadership experience into the work.
Thank you, Doug. Let's get to Beth now. Dr. Beth Malow is a practicing neurologist and sleep and autism researcher at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. She received her BS degree from Northwestern University and her MD from Northwestern University Medical School. She currently is professor of neurology and pediatrics, and she holds the Burry Chair in Cognitive Childhood Development. She is a science and health communicator and a facilitator for civil discourse groups, which of course includes Braver Angels. And she's been a longtime leader in the Braver Angels organization. She's also a trained workshop moderator and debate chair as part of that organization. She is a co-author of the Substack newsletter Together Across Differences. And she's co-author with Doug, of course, with their new book, Beyond the Politics of Contempt, Practical Steps to Build Positive Relationships in Divided Times. Beth, anything else you want to add to that?
No, thank you for that lovely introduction. I really am excited. As April mentioned, I recently moved to New England. I think I was attracted by Doug and his team of amazing Braver Angels up here. That was one of the attractions. I'm still working for Vanderbilt remotely. Fortunately, one can do work with kids with sleep problems and disabilities online on telehealth. So I've been doing that, reading sleep studies, doing some research projects. I'm really excited to be here and be in this vibrant environment in New England.
Doug, in addition to the bio, just anything you can tell us about your background, what led you to be the person you are, your current work, just basically anything else that we should know about you as an individual.
Well, that's a great question. I think back to my upbringing and how I came from a very loving family, even though my father died when I was very young in a he was in a car accident. His boss was driving, but my mother raised us three boys. We lived in a wonderful community. I think that I had a lot of advantages in life as I look back on it, and I was cared for. I had a roof over my head, and I think when you have that kind of a situation, you owe a little more back if you're able to do it, and that's where I've tried to take this work now that I'm later in life and been really concerned about our country's future.
Right. Thank you, Doug. How about you, Beth? Your turn. Fill us in on how we get to know you a little better as background and how you got to this point in life.
Well, I realized that a lot of the things I've done with my work in medicine, especially working in the field of disabilities, people with neurodiverse conditions, I've learned to be a really good listener. And I think that moves into my Braver Angels work really well. So my Braver Angels work has informed my work as a physician and researcher and vice versa. I'll just give you one example. I was recently asked to speak at a big pediatric sleep conference on how do you have challenging conversations with families about things like melatonin safety and should they have sleep apnea surgery for their child. And I'm immediately turning it from rather than boring speech, boring speech, boring speech, we're going to have some brief talks and then we're going to break into sections and people are going to practice role playing and listening to each other. And I feel like my Braver Angel skills have really informed my work, and my work has informed my advocacy and Braver Angels work. It's really been exciting to see that come to be.
Bill Doherty, family therapist, did a lot of our workshop development, and as a therapist myself, I thought I knew a lot of stuff, and then Braver Angels comes along, and I'm saying, man, I wish I'd known this earlier in my career. I could have used some of this in a different way that I hadn't thought of it. Now, one of the things we sometimes do in this podcast is we ask people to tell us where they reside politically. Are they red? Are they blue, purple, whatever? So if you will, would you each describe your own political leanings and what led you to those views? Doug, why don't you start?
Sure. I grew up, I can remember my mother being the town chairman for Nixon, and that was in 1960 when he ran against, I'm dating myself here a little bit, when he ran against John F. Kennedy, although later in the Vietnam War, I definitely went over to the blue side and began to protest the war. But when I settled and began to raise a family in a rural area in New Hampshire, I was inspired by a guy named Ray Burton, who was an executive counselor in New Hampshire and a Republican, and an opportunity came up, and I ran for office. Although I always try to approach it in a very kind of not so much of in a dogmatic point of view, but in a practical way. But in New Hampshire, where we have the town hall forms of government. It's a big state. It's a small state with a big legislature, which makes it fairly easy to get elected. And an opportunity came up, and I ran for it. And we also have the presidential primary, so I was involved with campaigns. In particular, John McCain. The first time he ran, I was very involved with his campaign. So. I've been a registered Republican, and I've maintained that status. Although for me, and I think most of us in Braver Angels, we're trying to just reach out and connect with people on all sides, and I try not to be too very dogmatic about it.
How about you, Beth? What color?
Oh, I think I'm blue purple. That's what I've settled on. I definitely lean blue. However, as a result of all the work I've done with Braver Angels and other groups, I've moved to the middle. And it's interesting because we say in Braver Angels, the goal isn't to move people to the middle. The goal is to stay where you are and instead be open to other people's ideas. The challenge for me is that as I've been open to other people's ideas, right, whether it's been on abortion or immigration or whatever, I found myself moving more to the middle. And I pride myself on having some really great conservative friends. When I lived in Tennessee for 21 years, I really enjoyed many of the Christian conservatives I met, even though I'm Jewish and lean blue. I really appreciated their sense of values and their love of family and all. And I put myself in situations through singing and various other community activities where I've come to really mix and get out of my liberal bubble, and I've really enjoyed it. I like the idea specifically of not having to choose between the blue box and the red box. I like the idea of being able to say, this is where I stand on abortion. This is where I stand on immigration. This is where I stand on climate, whatever. And not feeling like I have to go with the party line and agree with everything they say. I think it's healthier to be able to choose what you believe in as voters or whatever. That's why I'm blue purple.
And I appreciate what you say there. It sounds like you are persuaded more by your values than your identity on one side or the other. And I think that's part of what Braver Angels is trying to do is, go with your values. But thank you for that. I was going to ask both of you something. I think you've probably already answered it. So does anyone have anything to add about any early experiences or people in your early life that kind of contributed to your present values and what you're doing?
I'll just say my dad is very interesting. We talk a little bit about this in the book. My parents were solid Democrats. However, later in life, my dad started listening to conservative talk show hosts, and I thought he was nuts at first, right? But he gave me some books to read and some things to listen to, and I just tried to be open to them. And I think that was part of it, right? That was part of my really trying to listen to everybody and hear all these different opinions. I just wanted to mention my dad was very influential for me.
Thank you for that. Anything else from you, Doug?
Well, I just make the comment that, I think the big debate about government is or this whole issue is freedom versus responsibility. And this is the challenge for us. And really, as a country, we really need to have both. And the question becomes when do we err on the side of freedom? We obviously don't let people drive 100 miles an hour because that's dangerous for the rest of us. Or when do we err on the side of responsibility where we need to have a government program to look after people? So this is that's to me is this sort of constant kind of stress between freedom and responsibility. That's something that I appreciate and is about values that I think help us guide us as we go through these challenges.
It reminds me, of some people that have written about competing values. And so, where you place yourself with the freedom and the responsibility of those values, both of them are important, but depending on where you are politically on some issues, you might value one of those more than others. and or the vice versa. So that's a good point. Well, we want to get into your book because, and I've actually gotten a chance to read a pre-publication version of it, and I was really honored to be able to do that. When you're trying to write a book and deciding to write it, there's all kinds of things that go into that. It's kind of like a baby that you're birthing at some level, and you need to write it. So what led you all to write this book and to do it together? And I'd like to hear from both of you on this.
Well, I guess I'll start since it was kind of my idea. I guess I've been thinking a lot about this challenge and what we're facing as a country, and at the Brave Angels at the Gettysburg Convention, we've had two conventions since I've been involved. We had Gettysburg in 2023, and we had Kenosha in Wisconsin last year. But at Gettysburg, we were asked at the opening, "Why are you here?" And we were asked to write it on a card. And I wrote, "I'm here because I worry that my grandchildren are not going to enjoy the benefits of this country like I've had." And I think for me, that has been a driving force through this whole process of my work with Braver Angels. And I sort of had this idea that I should step up and do more. And I was encouraged by that, by some of the people who read I have a newsletter, Insights, my growing leadership. If you go to my growing leadership page, and I send out a monthly newsletter, and I started writing more and more about some of these issues. And I got a lot of positive feedback about when I started talking about some of these ideas. And I sort of got the idea late in 2023 that I should do more. And that if I wrote a book, I could probably raise my level. And I sort of I'm not big on New Year's resolutions usually, but maybe it was just the timing of it. I said, okay, I'm going to write a book. And I set off on the 1st of January or the 2nd of January thinking this isn't going to take more than 6 months. And now we're a year and a half into it. And it's certainly been quite an educational process. But I knew from the beginning that I was going to want other people, and I began to talk to other authors, other thought leaders and braver angels, to sort of testing the waters, who would really want to get all in on this. And maybe I'll pass it over to Beth.
Yeah, well, shortly after I moved to New England, Doug asked me if I would look at a few of his chapters, and I thought it was very cool. He was writing a book. And I read some of them and gave him some feedback. And one day out of the blue, he says to me, "So you want to be my co-author?" And I was like, "Sure." And I think I took him a little bit back, right? That I didn't say, "Oh, I don't know, let me think about it and get back to you." But it really sounded like something that I wanted to be involved in. And I haven't regretted it at all. Doug is an amazing person. He's got so much vision, so much energy. He has more energy than me. I don't know how he does it. He also climbs mountains, but that's for another podcast. And I I knew that it was the thing I wanted to do. And it was a part of it is I was writing a book at the time that I put aside and hopefully we'll get back to on science communication because during COVID, I saw areas that I thought we could do better in, even though I am a very strong supporter of the public health response to COVID. I also see some areas where we could have improved. And I wanted to write about that and some of the work I've done with later school start times in kids and standard time and various other areas for the public so that they would understand how science worked and how we can better communicate with the public. And I thought, you know what, let me work on this book with Doug. There'll be some elements of that through the civil discourse, and then I'll have some experience that I can then take back into my book. And I'm very, very proud of one of the chapters in the book that Doug let me write on my own pretty much on how you become a critical thinker and how you can apply that to polarization. And it's so funny because Doug told me there was way too much COVID in the book. But I really think it's an important narrative, an important metaphor for our times. We've all lived through it and we've all learned from it. And I appreciate his giving me the grace to write an entire chapter by myself and then edit. I pretty much edited and contributed stories, little stories. We all have to the book throughout the book. And I'm grateful to be part of it.
We should add, April, we have a third co-author, Becky Robinson, who runs a business, Weaving Influence. She's a book marketing and production professional. And she had actually, and I had been going, she did a lot of free webinars, where she's promoting books, a lot of leadership books. And that's how I knew her through my leadership business. And she, in her newsletter at the end of, I went back, I recently found the newsletter just before I started writing my book, and she wrote about what she was going to do in the next year. And I wrote, and she said, tell me what you're going to do. So I wrote her this long email and told her why I was writing this book. And she got quite interested. And we had several conversations. She gave me feedback on some early drafts, and then she kind of backed away. But interestingly, she came back to us the day after the presidential election. She said, I want in. And so she came in as the third author, and she's brought a lot of expertise in terms of the book professional and marketing expertise, but also different perspectives. Beth and I are both braver angels, and so we've drunk the braver angel Kool-Aid, so to speak. Whereas Becky it hasn't had that kind of exposure. So her stories are in the book too, and they add another dimension to the narrative.
One of the things I really like about your book actually are those vignettes, and if people end up picking up a copy of this when it comes out, they're going to notice this, is that oftentimes there are Doug and Beth and Becky stories kind of peppered throughout a particular chapter. And you all do such a wonderful job talking a little bit about, how you think about a particular issue. And you can see there's differences among you. But you're tying it back to the thinking processes that led you to those beliefs or those values. And it was fascinating. I felt like I was getting to know both of you even better. And I don't know Becky, but I really appreciated that part of the book.
We send the book out to some beta readers, and one person came back to us and said, you should be telling more stories, telling your stories. That's really where that came from. So I thought I'd written the perfect book, but of course now you start getting this feedback. This is the process. If you're going to write a book, people are going to read to it. You got to be really open to feedback. So I had feedback from my two co-editors, co-authors, but then this other woman came in and said, "Oh, you guys, you're doing it all wrong. Talk about more stories." Less quotes, more stories, and it was hard. I'm not going to say it was easy, but I appreciate that you like the way it came out.
Yeah, I really do. So for our listeners, I would like to hear from both of you. What is one overall takeaway that you'd like our listeners to know about your book?
Sure. I hope I don't steal your thunder, Doug. I think the main takeaway is summarized in something that you wrote that's on the back cover. We need to find a way to turn the politics of fear and contempt into the politics of hope. And I really believe that people are just so apathetic these days. I mean, I know there's certain fringes on the left and the right that are kind of at each other's throats. What I worry most about are the people in the middle. We call them the exhausted, or people have called them the exhausted majority, that have just turned off, tuned out, retreated into their bubbles and silos. And it's really sad because we've seen relationships, for example, that have been fractured, parents and kids and friends and neighbors who won't talk to each other because of somebody that the other person voted for that they detest or whatever. And it's really sad to see that. So that was a huge part of our book. The subtitle, Practical Steps to Build Positive Relationships in Divided Times. And not just telling people how we got to this point, which many excellent books out there have done. We really wanted to give people a practical guide to how they could fix it in their lives, and then maybe even more on a national level if they're so inclined.
Yeah, I'll add that, when we started out, the focus of the book was help us save the country. But and certainly that is the focus of the book. People say, what do you want from this country? And I want to change the country. It's very pretentious, of course, when you write a book to say that, but I mean, that's really our goal. But as we really got into it, we really got into it in a much deeper way. For instance, one of the things we talk about relationships, and I think this is a ripe area for Braver Angels that I brought up with our new CEO and other leaders, is let's help people solve their problems. There's a lot of people struggling through this polarization crisis that we're facing as a country. But let's start with helping people help manage their relationships with others. Let's help people deal with their own mental health. I mean, a lot of people are really stressed out now about the country, but we can give people tips and suggestions about how you can feel better about it, how you can overcome despair and build hope. And another really interesting thing that happened early on, as people got to know we were writing the book, or not early on, fairly recently, we were asked to go on a very large, a big training workshop by a group called Rise for Freedom, which was a sort of a coalition of indivisible and public citizen and left wing groups that were kind of protesting against the Trump administration. And we were asked to come on and do a little talk on how to talk to people with whom you have differences. And I have to say, I was a little skeptical at first. They already had the slides and everything. We were walking into this. But we got into it and people were interested. And there were 700 people on the call. 700 people across the country. I was having a hard time keeping up with the chat comments. But it was really exciting. And so I think we talked about, helping people with their mental health, helping them with relationships. But I think another really promising area for us in Braver Angels, a fertile area, is helping people who are activists. But at the same time, how are you a political activist, a partisan political activist, but also you can reach out to the other side. So the suggestion we made is if you're at a protest and there's somebody on the other side standing with an opposite sign, maybe you want to go across the street and say, hello, my name's so-and-so. I'd like to learn more about you. Can we go have coffee tomorrow? Tell me about your family. Tell me about your upbringing. Tell me about your hobbies. Tell me about your work. Tell me about how you came to believe the things you do. And then allow me to do the same, and we'll learn from each other. And I think, and we sort of described it at the end of the book, changing the country 2 people at a time.
Changing the country 2 people at a time. Yeah, so important. Well, I expect that in your own working relationships also that you probably had maybe some challenges, being that you're across the political divide from each other. And I'd like to know what it was like to write together.
I think Doug and Becky and I, for people who had never worked together on a project, did really remarkably well. And Becky, of course, is in a whole nother state, and we're hoping to meet her. We're planning a potential event together that we can all be together in person, which would be very cool. But I think that there were some challenges. Like Doug alluded to one. I was pretty critical initially when he asked for my candid feedback. I said, we talk about this guy and then the other guy and the other one, and he said this and he said that, and quote, quote, quote. And I said, I love quotes. I really do. I think what's going to sell the book is not people picking it up and reading what Teddy Roosevelt said. What's going to sell the book is picking it up and hearing about my story with someone in Tennessee, or your story, Doug, as someone in a rural area of New Hampshire, or Becky's story of having a transgender child, or whatever. That's really going to make the book. And initially there was a little bit of pushback, but in the end, I should say, and in the end, Doug came around, and I felt really good about that. I think the other thing that he alluded to is this whole activism bridge building, which I thought was like really important. And then in the middle of writing the book, Monica Guzman, one of the Braver Angels leaders, came to Dartmouth and gave a talk, and the moderator stole my question. Well, she asked it before I did, which is there a way that you can be an activist and a bridge builder at the same time? And she gave a beautiful response. That's in the book. And I remember thinking, Doug, this is it. This is like what's happening now. We have to help people who want to be activists learn that they can also be bridge builders, and you're not going against being an activist if you try to build bridges, because a lot of people feel like the two are incompatible. And initially, Doug, I don't think he quite got what I was trying to say, and I just kept bringing it up. And eventually, not only did he get it, I think you've embraced it, Doug. You're always talking about how we have to bring up the activist bridge building issue and intersection. Those are the two examples I have of where there was a little bit of friction, but we overcame it. And I feel really good about our working relationship.
Well, I think we've been a great team, and you're going to work with other people, and it's going to be hard. I mean, working with other people is hard, and I hadn't thought about it, but I suppose it's a little bit what we're advocating, for the country. The three of us can do it, you can do it too, kind of thing. You don't have to write a book, but find ways to communicate. And I mean, another aspect of that is the sort of the Steve Saltwick approach, which is trying to solve local problems together, which is another theme that we bring up in the book. How do we work together? How do we find issues, and how do we get people to sort of step back and say, oh, maybe I'm a little too much in a bubble. And Glen had mentioned values early on, and I think one of the most important chapters in the book is, I think it's chapter 8, where we talk about what are your values. Identify your values. Write down your top values, and there's various ways you can do that. Brene Brown has some tools for that, other people, but what are your top 3, 5 values? And then once you kind of get that honed down, then now think about people on the other side of politics and write down what do you think about them? What do you say about them? And then compare the two lists. Are you living your values? Are you living up to your personal values when you talk about people on the other side of politics? And then, so the third, when you really compare them, I think that's where it all has to start. I mean, if we're going to change the country, it has to start in my heart. It has to start in my heart, and it has to start in your heart, but not because I'm telling you that, because you embrace it. So you can't be a bridge builder, and you can't be effective as a bridge builder if you're not really clear about who you are, what you believe, how you feel about other people, and what are the core, what's at your core, what's deep within you. And that work is really essential, I think, to really take this where we think it needs to go.
You've given multiple takeaways there. I'm hoping that makes people want to actually get your book.
Well, that's it for the first part of April and Glen's conversation with Doug Teschner and Beth Malow. We'll continue this conversation in the next episode, so be sure to check out part 2. And remember, On the Other Hand offers dozens of other interviews like this one. You can find our On the Other Hand podcast inside your favorite podcast app or on the podcast page of the Braver Angels Arkansas website at arkansas.braverangels.org.
Thanks for joining us on today's edition of On the Other Hand, the first part of our conversation with Doug Teschner and Beth Malow. On the Other Hand is sponsored by Braver Angels in Arkansas. Music was composed by Randall Standridge of Jonesboro, Arkansas, and was performed by the University of Northern Colorado Symphonic Band, Dr. Richard Main, conductor.
From your host, Glen White,
and April Chatham Carpenter.
Join us in working to make our relationships and communities better.